Thank you. Good morning, and welcome to the October 24th meeting of the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System Audit Committee. I will call the meeting to order. We do have quorum. With that, I'll entertain a motion to approve the agenda.
So move.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the agenda. All in favor?
Aye.
The agenda is approved. Has everyone had a chance to review the minutes from the July 25th meeting? Are there any additions, comments, or deletions? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve the minutes.
So move.
It's been properly moved and seconded that we approve the minutes from our previous meeting. All in favor? The minutes are approved. We have one audit today on speech language pathologists, so I'll turn it over to Leah and Jack.
Good morning. Good to be here and actually get to talk about this audit now. I appreciate all of your flexibility and understanding in giving us a little bit of extra time to go through some stuff. So, we had this, we were finalizing the audit report for the meeting that was scheduled for last month, and then as we were finalizing that, some additional information was kind of brought to our attention. And so we felt that we needed to give that extra information a little attention.
Yes.
Okay. Give that information a little extra attention and determine how relevant it was to the findings of our audit. Ultimately, the findings of the audit did not change, but that additional information, added a little context, clarified some things. So there have been, a few inclusions, referencing additional steps the district had taken to kind of address some of the things that are discussed in the audit. So we wanted to make sure to include that information and also some clarification between kind of Godot guidance and other professional organizations that work with speech pathologists. So that's how we got to where we are now. So our audit, we had 5 objectives for this audit. We were looking to review district policies and procedures related to speech and language pathology services to ensure compliance with local, state, any federal guidelines that would apply. We took a look at staffing levels and caseloads for SLPs to ensure that they're compliant with industry guidelines and allow the SLPs to effectively work with our students. We're looking to determine if the resources available to SLPs in the district are sufficient to provide services to the students they work with. We're evaluating collaboration between SLPs and the other school staff and stakeholders that they work with, and then conducting a review of contracts with third-party providers because the district does use outside providers to provide additional services. Quick snapshot of SLPs and the work that they do. So speech-language pathologists, they provide special education services to students with communication needs through all district schools, but also charter schools, other community educational settings. So, the district has some responsibility to private school students, homeschool students that would meet eligibility criteria. Students receive services through, either a primary, secondary, or, tertiary eligibility. So there's, evaluation and assessment that's in place. And then there is an ongoing shortage, across much of the country for SLPs, and that's especially prevalent in school settings. So through the audit, we found several areas of improvement within the monitoring structure of the district's SLP program and of the supports provided to SLPs, and that includes contract administration for those third-party vendors, caseload size for SLPs, supervision and organization within the program, and then supplies and materials that are available to speech pathologists. Our first observation has to do with those third-party contracts and how those are managed. We found insufficient monitoring controls in place related to those contracts. So the district uses contract SLPs to address additional service needs when those needs kind of exceed the staffing capacity within the district. For fiscal years 2021 through 2023, we had contracts with 5 vendors in place through RFP 2037. And then for fiscal year 2024, we had 3 contracts in place. We were between RFPs, so we had 3 contracts in place to ensure that we were able to continue to provide services. Through the audit, we found some delayed payments to vendors, some inconsistencies between the information that's stored in Munis and what was on contracts or what was on invoices, and then some instances where services were provided outside of the terms of the contract. Like I said, in the past fiscal year, the district used additional contracts outside of the RFP process. And another contract we have through ESS, which provides substitute coverage. That's how the district gets substitute teachers, but speech pathologists are included in the terms of that. So they use that contract as well to address service needs. And then a new RFP was approved by the board in June of 2024 for the current school year. Our recommendations here were to conduct regular accounts payable audits to ensure timely payments and correct updated information in Munis, and to develop procedures to ensure that the services that are provided align with the scope outlined in the contract. Questions about?
Are there any questions? We'll take questions after each observation. Are there any questions? Mr. Moss?
Yeah. I am wondering if trying to put this gingerly, our challenges with getting our SLPs paid on time is affecting how many companies want to work with us.
I can't speak specifically to that. I do know through the RFPs, there were more organizations applied or submitted bids through the RFP process than were selected. So I don't know.
How many of the ones that we had returned?
I don't know specifically. I know there was some overlap between the ones that we had and the ones that either we had those additional contracts in place during kind of that gap year between RFPs, but specifically how many, I don't know off the top of my head.
Okay. I really would like to know how many of those that had worked with us before came back, and if they didn't come back and do another RFP, if we know why they didn't return. Okay, all right. Continue.
I have one question kind of like that, but mine is when we don't pay the bills and these folk do or do not come back, does that have an impact on our ability to serve the students that need the service?
I didn't find any instances of that specifically, and I think, my understanding, some of the delays in payments, you got to put a little context. This is all happening, kind of as COVID is going on, and we're virtual, we're in place, we're kind of going back and forth with that, and so I think some of those additional need for additional therapists stemmed from a lot of that. And I think some of the procedures we had in place. There was some, adjusting procedures to, streamline this process to get those payments. Because it does seem that over the course of that RFP, over that 3-year period, the process did improve.
I have a concern with the fact that there have been so many different inconsistencies between invoices, names, and what's in Munis as well. Not just the delayed payments to vendors, but the fact that it's not, it's hard to follow the money. And since we're dealing with public funds, we need to make sure that we can actually properly follow the money. Because just for example, .com therapy, we have it under .com therapy in our program, but the invoices are coming from a different company. And it not being properly documented. What happened there, and kind of why, how, and who dropped the ball. That's my biggest concern, because if it's something that it should be relatively easy to change within our system, it throws up a red flag saying, what else are we missing? What other balls are we dropping with this? Because not only do we legally have to help these children, but we also have an ethical duty to help these children as well. And I take this incredibly personally, because when I was in school, I had a speech therapist that was provided by that school district. I know the value of it, and the fact that if we can't get our payments right on this, where else are we failing these kids? And how are we failing them? So it has me incredibly concerned that somebody dropped the ball somewhere, whether it's the vendor, whether it's the finance department, whomever. We need to, and I know you have on here that there's going to be quarterly reviews and everything else, but I guess my big question is, how many inconsistencies did you find with all the stuff that you looked at? Like, do you know the percentage of what those inconsistencies were?
I don't, off the top of my head. I will say, some of those instances, so another example, EBS. EBS was one of the contractors that had a contract through that RFP. And they absorbed Stepping Stones Group, which then was the vendor providing services. So, a lot of these smaller companies, they're kind of merging, and, one is, acquiring another one. And so the services are provided kind of, doing business as scenario. But that information didn't always get updated or reflected in Munis. This is also, Munis, I think, was being implemented during this timeline as well.
I remember when Munis came through and everything, but it's concerning that someone gets an invoice from, and I'm going to go back to the .com therapy, they get an invoice from Huddle Up Care Inc., but we're going and we're not paying Huddle Up Care Inc., we're paying .com therapy, and there's really not, it's like, how does the left hand not know what the right hand's doing with that? And that's a concern.
Good morning. I'm Rosalind Nathaniel in finance. The problem that we had at this time was not so much that accounts payable was not paying the invoices. What we had was, and I guess it was started from during the pandemic, and then the changes during that time, when students weren't actually in classes, they were, I don't know, servicing from home or whatever, getting the services to the children. We had the contracts in place for these services. The vendors apparently were servicing the children. The vendors were not sending us invoices to be paid. We paid the invoices when they were provided to us. At some point during those times, the vendors changed their names, but it was the same person providing the services. Where AP Finance failed during that time was We had contracts. We should have had purchase orders with those companies' names on for the schools to match the services with the contract. But when the vendor was the same person providing services, they have changed names. They provided invoices with different names on it. They were paid. That was an error on our part. But what we found out, if you look at it, you may see some of those invoices went back maybe 2, 3, 4, 500 days paid late. That was because the vendor did not provide us the invoices. We had some changes on the academic side as far as the directors and their, and who's responsible for getting the invoices from the children. I mean, not from the children, from the providers of services. So someone in the academic side ended up getting with those vendors saying, hey, we need invoices from you. So when AP received the invoices, we paid the invoices within a week or two of getting the invoices. It's just that the services, the system wasn't in place where we had someone ensuring that the vendors were providing invoices on a timely manner.
Okay, and just as a follow-up question, going through the process with speech pathology, is finance looking at to make sure that any of those gaps that were happened in the past are not currently happening?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
What we put in place now is to ensure that, okay, as Mr. O'Sullivan said, that in June, we have the new RFP contracts. We have requested that whomever is responsible for that contract, that they ensure that we have purchase orders with those vendors in place. So as they are providing the services, they can refer back to the invoice to the purchase order to match, number one, ensure that the contracted prices are matched with the invoice, and that we can track the invoices along with the contracts.
And I know this is not, my next question is not a finance question, probably more of a academics and specialized instruction. Are we ensuring also with that these vendors are getting paid? And I know we can't go back in time, unfortunately, during the pandemic time, but there were stories that students weren't getting the required amount of therapy during that time. Have we gone back and looked at those vendors and made sure that they did the work that we paid them to do?
No, that would be something that the academic.
I know, that's what I said. I know that's not
Exactly.
finance, but
Right.
that's a follow-up from what you were saying,
Right,
so.
yes.
I don't know if we've done that or not, but I think that's something to possibly look at.
We've had some meetings with the academics, and I know on that side that there have been, new structure has been put in place where they're in the hierarchy of providing services to the children, that there is a stopgap person in there that now, instead of the schools simply being responsible for ensuring that the invoices match the services that they receive, that there is a person on the academic side that is responsible for coordinating all of that, and it's that person's responsibility to ensure that the invoices that the services rendered match the invoices, and that the parents or whomever is signing off on it saying, yes, we did receive these services. So that structure has been put in place also.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I do. Yes, Ms. Miles.
I'm saying, yeah. So I'm probably, I moved ahead, I'm sorry. So in your recommendations here, you said you suggested conducting regular accounts payable audits to ensure that the payments are made promptly and that they're correct. Are you saying that we weren't doing accounts payable audits on SLPs before?
Well, what was not happening at that time, we had contracts in place. The invoices we're not tied specifically to a contract. So what we've asked our AP area to now do is to ensure that when we get an invoice for the services rendered from a vendor such as these, that it refers to a purchase order, and the purchase order is going to refer back to a contract.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay.
Thank you.
Real quick, and I'll direct this to the district. Who, AP is just an umpire. They're executing an approval. Who is approving these invoices? Is that happening at the school level, or is that at the executive director of specialized learning?
Yes, so that would be our special ed program managers and the director of specialized instruction.
Okay. And we are currently, if I'm reading this correct, in FY '23, we are $300,000 over budget. We had a RFP award estimate of 800, and we spent 1.12 million.
That I can't, I'll have to get back to you on that number, yeah.
Okay. And all of that went, I mean, all of it, but 7,000 went to this EBS healthcare. So in 2023, we had, looks like we may have awarded 5 contracts or 7 contracts, but we, and I know there was some roll-up you said, but we gave $1 million, basically, of the 1.12 we spent, 1.105 went to one contractor.
Okay, and that's where, with our purchase orders, was us having a purchase order, if that vendor in our RFP was awarded, say, $300,000, if we had a purchase order in place for the $300,000 with AP paying the invoices, that would have been seen a lot earlier.
Right.
But then, in this instance, what the problem was that the vendor had not provided all of the invoices in a timely manner. So we had to
We
end up
can't-
paying them for the services.
As a former government contractor, you can't pay them more than they want to get paid.
Okay.
I understand that. But what jumps out off the page, and to Mr. Moss's point about quarterly controls, is we spent $300,000 more than we thought last year, and it doesn't sound like on the operations side that it was like, hey, we're $300,000 over budget. And we've got to do speech therapy. No one's arguing, hey, that we're not going to stop spending money on speech therapy, but it is $300,000. And if correct me if I'm wrong, Jack, am I reading this correct? We've spent $538,000 this year, again with EBS Healthcare, and it says no RFP in place, so we're just paying them we just extended that contract,
The contract, they would have been
which
paid
just was
on
extended, and we paid them. And it looks like, if I'm saying this was done in June, we're on track for another $1 million thereabouts.
unless they have changed the types of services and the way that's being handled. But finance and academics has set up meetings where we're meeting with their staff on a monthly basis until or everybody's comfortable that the process is working.
Good.
Where we're ensuring that the vendors are providing us invoices on a timely manner. And that way, it would not get to the point where they're submitting invoices to us for what has exceeded their contract.
Right. And I guess we have some control in place now to prevent expenditure beyond the contract amount. Like what in effect would be a change order? Okay, good. Yes, sir. Oh, Dr. Robinson.
This is, I've got a couple of questions or concerns, but from a procurement standpoint, when we look at the limited availability nationwide or statewide, and the ability to hold on to who we have, but still monitor the quality of service they're providing, is that one of the things that we're really looking at?
Now, on that side, that's out of my wheelhouse.
Yeah,
When
but
you're talking about the services and their availability, from an academic side, I'm sure whatever, if they're saying that this is what's needed for the children, then if we need to do budget adjustments or not, to extend more monies for it, we're going to do what we need to do to make sure the children are serviced.
Yeah, because from the report, just, I don't know, I guess my concern would be about our ability we need to pay the bills so we can keep the services to the children. And because there's such a shortage of those individuals, so I would be concerned about what are we doing to ensure that the bills are paid and we're able to still provide these services. Yeah, and on page 16 of the observation 3 of supervision and organization, there is no formal district procedure in place regarding when SLPs are required to make up sessions when they are unable to see students. So what are we putting in place to ensure that the sessions are made up?
So I'm going to have Ms. Ruth Gillens, our Executive Director, speak to that.
Good morning. One of the things that has been done to help monitor and ensure that our students are receiving services is the addition of a hired program manager who has a speech background, who understands the full process and how services should be rendered. And she's also helping to monitor services across the schools. With that, we are able to provide the services to students. We send home notifications to parents that may require compensatory services for them, and those parents can choose to accept the services or waive the services. But for every child, if they missed any of their services, we extended work agreements during the summer to also pay for SLPs to provide compensatory services to ensure that students are receiving exactly what they need.
Yes, ma'am.
Microphone.
On page 3, the front of the report, our field work was conducted from April to June 2024 and focused on a judgmental sample of 10 schools. I underlined the word judgmental. By definition, what is that?
So by definition, a judgmental in the auditing world means that to be a true random sample means there's no human element that can dictate what that sample is, and just looking at numbers and picking this one and this one requires human element. So we did not use like a random number generator. We just tried to focus on elementary to middle and high. So in the audit world, when we use the word judgmental, that means we did not use an electronic method to determine which ones to choose. We had a human go in and say, this school, this school. So if there was any element where we had to kind of focus on, say if we were looking for a specific school with a population, we would highlight that in there. But in this, it's just a complete judgmental sample in that there was no random number generator to choose which school we chose. So, and I can provide a more detailed kind of explanation to you and examples if you would like that. Okay.
Are there any other questions on observation 1? Thank you.
All right, observation 2 had to do with caseload size for SLPs, and we found many instances in which SLP caseloads exceeded the limits set by Godot. So SLPs, they have a variety of responsibilities, and the size of the caseload, the number of students they serve can affect their ability to balance all those responsibilities effectively. So different states have different caseload limits. The limit set by Godot here in Georgia is 55 students. ASHA is the American Speech Language Hearing Association. So that's the credentialing body for SLPs. They don't provide a caseload recommendation because caseloads can vary significantly. So they emphasize a focus on workload. Because caseloads, for 2 different SLPs, if each has a caseload of 55, those can be drastically different depending on the needs of the students they're serving, the service models that are being used. So one could have, a much more intensive caseload of 55 than another one. So that's where that, focus on workload comes in. One thing we found is SLPAs, which are speech language assistants. Those are staff that can assist SLPs. They can't carry their own caseload, but they can perform some tasks, provide some services to students, and other responsibilities that can kind of alleviate that workload for SLPs. There was a disconnect that we found between what Godot allows. Godot has more restrictive requirements for what they're allowed to do than what ASHA recommends. And then, so for the SLPs that we interviewed for the audit, we found caseloads ranged from 55 to 99. Median caseload size was 68. We also found the district had implemented multiple strategies, over the last year, especially in an attempt to address those high caseloads and workloads for SLPs. So our recommendations here were to do quarterly caseload reviews and implement strategies to reduce and adjust caseloads as necessary, and then identify opportunities for increased use of SLPAs within the district.
Mr. Moss? I'm going to make an inference.
I didn't have to raise my hand.
I'm going to guess.
Okay, so, wow. I'm dumbfounded. I'm absolutely dumbfounded. You're saying that we have SLPs that have a caseload of 99 kids. And I'm just going to ask you, Ms. Butler. So on the, and maybe Ms. Dillon as well, on bringing in SLPAs, these acronyms kill me. How are we working? I mean, what is the requirement to be an SLPA? Do they have to have do they have to have a master's? Do they have to have a bachelor's degree? What are the requirements there?
So to be credentialed as an SLPA through ASHA, so that's the credentialing body, it's a bachelor's level credential, whereas an SLP is a master's level.
Okay,
But
so
within Georgia, Godot views them as paraprofessionals, and so that's some of that disconnect. Whereas paraprofessionals in Georgia don't necessarily need a bachelor's degree.
So you can be an SLPA and not have a bachelor's?
No.
You can't be a credentialed SLPA through ASHA without a bachelor's, is my understanding.
And the ones that we want those that are credentialed, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right.
And that was one of the things that the district had done over the last year. It was kind of a payroll review to try to bring that salary up to be more competitive.
So were we paying SLPAs like paraprofessionals?
Slightly above.
I-
Go ahead. Jack,
They were paid slightly above the regular paraprofessionals in the district. Because they are required to have their bachelor's, and if they're credentialed, and we want credentialed, we do pay them slightly higher than we pay regular classroom paraprofessionals.
Okay, and this is just going to be a general question, that we'll deal with the board on is, do we have a challenge based on what we're paying our SLPs? Is that limiting how many SLPs we're able to hire and how many SLPAs we're able to hire?
Well,
Are we competitive?
not as competitive as we could be.
That's what I need to know. All right.
Yes, ma'am.
And I was looking at the numbers, if I understood it correctly, the SLPAs, you have 5 positions, but only 1 has been filled, so you have 4 vacancies, is that correct?
Currently, we did fill 2 additional vacancies, so we have 3 at this time. But it still is a challenge in even having applications for SLPAs.
And I think my concern really comes more from a providing services to students perspective, the dollar amounts, that's what you guys do. But I say spend the money and serve the children.
Yes.
That's my position. So I just think that whatever we need to do to be competitive, Roger, it's got to happen. Because we got to service these children.
Yes.
And can I ask one other, Michael, I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I need to go back a little bit. When I read this, I'm to understand an audit of this kind has never been done before. Did I read that correctly?
Specifically focusing on speech pathologists.
This is the
believe
first
that's
time
correct. Yeah.
something this intensive is done in this area. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's correct.
That is correct.
Yeah. And that's the other thing. Well, yeah.
Well, we staff the audit department. Michael, go ahead.
A couple things. One, this is probably more of a finance question. How much do we get from the state
Oh, yeah.
through QBE for an SLP? Do you know? Okay. Because I think that's one thing that we could all, depending on what that number is, one thing that we can look at with going through our legislative priority process, talking about QBE, if we're not getting enough funding for SLPs from the state, even though the state sets a limit on how many students as a caseload that are SLPs, that's a whole nother can of worms that I don't want to open up right now. With the SLPAs, have we noticed an improvement on the workload for the SLPs with the SLPAs?
We use the SLPAs to assist with our virtual SLPs. That allows us to manage caseloads a little better when we have a virtual SLP and a SLPA who can physically sit with our students. So it is helping to reduce caseloads in a little, but we do need more.
Okay, what I would like to see, especially knowing that going through the budget process, what would the recommendation be for funding at proper levels for SLPs and SLPAs? Knowing that Godot puts us at a 55 student limit per SLP, and knowing that if we use the recommendation from ASHA, which focus on the workload, and reading through all the notes and everything else, that would actually put it more at a 45 student caseload per SLP. Having it at the maximum 55 through Godot, using SLPAs to have the workload be the equivalency of 45. What's that number? I think the board as a whole needs to understand what are the limitations set by the state and federal government? What are those numbers? And how much is it going to cost in order to be able to properly reach those numbers so we don't have a single SLP at 99 caseload? I understand that workload could be different depending on what those individual cases are.
Yes.
But that's almost double what Godot says that the limit is. And
Yes.
that's scary.
It is.
Especially knowing how much time, when I was in speech pathology, going through speech pathology, how much time that speech pathologist spent with me individually, one-on-one, every single week. That's a lot of work. And I was not a serious case. So, and knowing that there are some children out there with major speech issues, we need to, as a, not just through audit committee and seeing these numbers, but as the board, Mr. Moss, we need to look at it of how can we as a board, working with specialized instruction, working with finance, truly support the most vulnerable children with needs that we have to not only legally, but morally and ethically, we need to be supporting as well.
Just looked it up. The state gives us 38.9 positions for special ed, no speech.
Oh, good Lord.
So they give us requirements through Godot, but once again, they don't fund it from the state. So once again, it is another unfunded mandate from the state. So we have to pay for it through either grants or local taxes because the state won't do their job. Gotcha.
I have one other question with the students getting the services through SLPs. Does that include students where English is their second language? Are they included in that number of children?
If they've been identified to receive those services, yes.
But not because English is their second language. They have to have a speech impediment.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they go through the ESOL. So that's a completely different department that has its own problems.
Exactly. Are there any other comments on observation two? I would just, the average is 123% over the state limit at 68. So that's bad. I mean, let's not sugarcoat this. You're right, it's an unfunded mandate, but I think your first sentence was more important. This is not, hey, we got to make sure everybody gets some training. We have a moral and ethical responsibility to our most at-risk children. I hope the district this is why we have an audit committee, this is why we have an audit department. This is bad, and I hope we see some real action. I mean, and I know we got 2 more observations to go, but I mean, I hope we all understand that, this is the basket we got to catch, so. Number 3.
Number 3. So this one deals with supervision and organization. And we found the district's current supervision structure for SLPs is insufficient to effectively monitor the SLP program. So during the 23-24 school year, the district had one special education program manager who oversaw the SLP program, but also oversaw school psychologists, PSI assessment, and the special education programming at 8 school sites. SLPs received some additional supervision from the program manager assigned to their school site. Their principal, assistant principal, ECST, district staffing specialists, and then those that were based at school sites, their annual evaluation was given by the principal, school administration. For the 23-24 school year, the district established liaison groups to provide some additional support. So these were pods of SLPs that would kind of collaborate and communicate with each other to, answer questions, provide support, and then, questions that weren't able to be answered within that liaison group were then passed up to, district leadership. We found that there was no specific written guidance in place for SLPs. There had been, a written document that was used, previously that was discontinued a few years ago. In the district's special ed implementation manual, it's more of a general document, doesn't, apply to any specific eligibility, really. And then the SLPs we interviewed indicated that there was limited or inconsistent supervision opportunities throughout the district. One of the objectives of our audit, remember, had to do with collaboration, and we kind of found that the supervision structure kind of results in limited opportunities for collaboration. as well. So our recommendations here were to develop some written guidance for SLPs, and then provide, initial and then, regular training on that guidance. Evaluate the supervision structure in place for SLPs, create systems that facilitate collaboration, and establish lines of communication to identify and address SLP concerns.
Yes, sir.
So I know we use third-party vendors to help fill gaps with SLPs. I'm assuming, we all know what they say about assumptions, that this is just for district employees and not for those vendors.
Some of the SLPs we spoke with were contract SLPs, and we did, ask them questions because they do need some support, if they're having, interactions with other staff, or they need help with particular students or things. So we did ask them about what was in place for them as well. Questions about like annual evaluations and those things, those didn't apply
Right.
to SLP, to contract SLPs.
And this is more, I guess, for the district side. One thing that I've noticed, one of my big observations, that it seems like one of the biggest issues with that, whether it comes from an audit report, or talking with staff that have moved from one site to another, are the inconsistencies of following policy, following regulations, following, what the district guidelines are for training, supervision, evaluation. I hope that this is just another example for the superintendent and cabinet to look at of how can we fix the inconsistencies across the board at the different sites. And it doesn't matter, and I don't care if it's our highest performing school or our lowest performing school. An inconsistency is not a good thing, because I can go on 5 different campuses in this district on any given day and see 5 different enforcement of the dress code, just as an example. So this is just one more example, one more red flag of the inconsistencies throughout the district. And I know we have a large district, the 10th largest in the state. However, with inconsistencies, we're going to get inconsistent results, whether it's from SLPs, whether it's from dealing with boosters, whether it's dealing with giving invoices to finance so they can pay it, to dress codes. And all that adds up to is we're going to have inconsistent results when it comes to academic outcomes and the success for our students.
Thank you. Any other comments? Mr. Ross?
Who evaluates our outside contractors?
The program manager now evaluates our outside SLPs. All of those that are on contracts is monitoring. They do not have the same evaluation instrument that is required by the district and the state. However, they are monitored, and if we have any concerns presented from the ECST, DSS's, principals, then we have conversations with those persons, the providers for the contracted professionals.
Okay.
And have we ever suspended an SLP that wasn't performing?
Based on my knowledge, there hasn't been a suspension, but there have been conversations with those who had not been performing well, and some of them chose to leave because they know if that information is shared about performance, that it could hamper their ability to perform in other places.
Okay. It's very hard to say this contractor is doing a good job or not doing a job if we don't have a written procedure for how we're supposed to be doing it. So again, we're not trying to pound the rock today, but I mean, this is.
We are working on that process. Having arrived in November and this process had already started, we are trying to make those strides to make some serious corrections in those inconsistencies and lack of procedures and policies for each of our areas under specialized instruction.
Okay, thank you.
Because according to this report, it's anticipated that they'll have that ready by November 1.
We're on pace to make it happen.
Thank you. Number 4.
Number 4. So the last observation has to do with supplies and materials. So SLP, it's a very specialized field, a specialized position within the district, and they use, assessments and tools, really, to identify and address the needs of the students they work with. Like with any profession, those tools are updated periodically. New assessments come out, new versions come out. And so the district procedure is to, obtain the new version within a year of its release. We found some inconsistency in how SLPs in the district obtain supplies and materials and what's available to them. Found some instances where, those newer versions of assessments weren't readily available, or, some uncertainty from SLPs and who they contact, where they get things. So our recommendations here were to develop procedures to ensure timely access to supplies and materials, and to ensure the most recent versions of assessments are available.
Yes, sir.
That lovely word of inconsistency again. I hope that when we're building the guidelines, we're also putting in there this kind of stuff for the SLPs of who they need to contact when they need materials and what kind of materials they like the specialized materials they have access to. Whether it's the principal on site or if it's the program manager, whomever it is, just somebody they have a point to saying, I need X, Y, Z. And that way they're not having to do that. But it's not just SLPs, it's also, I hear it from teachers, I hear it from paras. This seems to be more not necessarily on the SLPs and this department when it comes to accessing materials in a timely manner and updated in the most recent version. This, to me, is more of a systematic problem. It's a problem within our system of how we do it, because we have way too many employees buying supplies and materials out of their own pocket and not being able to get the materials they need to be that top performing teacher, to have those top performing students. And the teachers or in the SLPs who don't have the extra funds to be able to do it, those are the kids that get slipped through the cracks. So I think we need to look at not just from special ed, but we need to look at system-wide of how to get these materials and assessments and whatever it is to our staff, because we have a huge budget, and if we can't provide what the teachers and the SLPs need in the classroom so they can learn, we're failing. Bottom line, we are failing if SLPs cannot get the supplies they need to make sure that these kids they can have the proper language skills, the communication skills, so they're not getting teased, they're not getting bullied. Because being one of these kids at one time, that's the hardest part about school. And thank God my speech pathologist had the material she needed, so I wasn't talking like Elmo Fudd today.
Having heard that this is an unbudgeted area and seeing that the monies are coming out of the special ed budget for these schools, are principals having to make a decision as to whether they're going to give the money to SLPs out of their special ed money? I mean, because I'm thinking sometimes you got to weigh it, and which is unfortunate. But these kids need to be served as well, but they're unbudgeted, but they're lumped into a special ed budget that's probably already stretched. So are principals making the decision how these funds will be spent and if they will be spent on SLPs?
Dr. Robinson, one of the things that we're doing currently, and again, there are lots of new procedures and structures being put in place just based on this audit alone and me being in the position I am in now. What we're doing is working with risk management. Our SLPs, PT, and OT staff can bill for services. And with that billing, it brings in additional funds to the district that we are using now to provide what the SLPs need. So we are working feverishly to make sure that billing is occurring because as of last week, when I spoke with Mr. Teamer, the technician, we'd received $11,000 based on billing for just the month of August. So if we are on pace and each of the SLPs are billing, then we will have additional funds to get them those supplies that they need, as well as we're focusing on funds that are in our federal grants as well to support SLPs. But it's really about leadership and making sure that structures and procedures are in place, and we are working on those pieces.
And the backup to that question is, with our third-party vendors, do they have the same issue of getting supplies? Or are they expected to have the supplies?
Based on our understanding, they have those supplies that are provided through the vendor, the contractor. So, but we still monitor what they need. If there's something else that they don't have and we need to provide it in the moment, we make sure that we are providing that to them.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Follow-up question to that, do our contracted SLPs, or do our third-party vendors, they also need to know who to contact to get those supplies that they need?
Yes, and we do have a designated program manager for speech who is a former speech pathologist herself. So she knows what those materials are, and she is credentialed to be able to get those materials for us. So they do have a direct contact in the program manager as well as the director who supervises that program manager.
Okay, I'm not saying we're not, because I'm not in the room when they come in, but can we just make sure and ensure that we have let even our third-party contracted SLPs know that they can contact, John Smith, so that way, and basically have them, before they see one of our children, have them sign a piece of paper that they have also been told to contact XYZ, our program director, XYZ at XYZ number
Yes.
for any support, additional support they may need for our students.
Yes, that will be a part of the manual. They'll have that information in writing so that they know exactly who to reach out to.
And can we make sure we point that out? Because those are the kind of details that a lot of times get missed and skipped over. And when they say they didn't know, and you say, oh, well, it's in the manual, when a lot of our manuals are like that thick, especially when we had third-party vendors and third-party contracted people, they're not going to read a manual that thick. They're going to skim over it.
It won't be that thick
Okay,
because we
good.
have an implementation manual for specialized instruction for overall, but this will be specific to the SLPs. So it will not be one that is huge because it will contain just the guidance and policies and practices that they need to focus on.
And can we just make sure like the high points of those things are highlighted within when we are onboarding people? Just because those are, like I said, those are the details that get missed 9 times out of 10.
Yes.
And those are the details that can save a student.
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? If not, I'll entertain a motion to accept the report. It's been properly moved and accepted that we accept the audit of speech language pathologists. All in favor?
Aye.
Report is adopted. Just one quick sidebar or comment. I mean, obviously, you feel the passion in the committee. The purpose of audit is to help the district see where we can get better, and this is critical. So we look forward to your management action plan, and we look forward to seeing this report. We are going to keep this on our agenda.
And I might add, great work, Jack.
Yes, thank you, Jack. Great work.
Excellent work.
The next items are informational items. I will briefly go over them with you. We are bringing the benchmark report at the request of an audit committee member in the last attended audit committee. And so what we've done is, in that section was about the makeup of the audit committee team. What we've done is we've actually removed that. An analysis of kind of what she's brought to us. What we've done is well, let me say that. We did update it here a little bit, but we're going to remove that so that we focus our benchmark report strictly on our department, not necessarily the audit committee. Those kind of things will be communicated with the board president, because it is the board president that sets the appointments and so forth moving forward. So there's been no real changes other than we have removed the composition part of the audit committee makeup not as requested as Dr. Hoskins Brown had presented, but the concern that there may be dual job functions, and trying to trace that really isn't. We're trying to benchmark our department for you all, not necessarily the structure of the audit committee. Okay. So the next session is the map report. So what we're adding to this process now is we are trying to streamline all these documents for you. As you know, this progress monitoring report, this is related to the strategic plan. So this is items that we will provide to you on a monthly basis. Those are known as lead measures. And so we will be providing that to you. But what you will see at the end of the year is our summary of reports. As you can remember, we present that to you once a year. So as this little section called the progress monitoring report, this is what we'll be showcasing to you monthly, but you will see it in its full capacity with all audits for the entire year at the end with the summary of reports. And so one of the things we focus on here is looking to see the percent of management's completion. As you can see, there's still a lot to be reported out later this year. And we're at 53% on that. So we're still on task to have those completed. And right now, as you can see, the speech language pathologist has not been added. This process gets added after the board approval of the consent agenda. So you will see this on next month's report. And as you know, if it's due, I'll give you an example. Dr. Robertson made reference, is this the November 1st date? Is this your target? So yes, but what we will do is we will follow up in December for that, or in the next meeting. So we do allow them that month. So if it does say November 2024, we do allow that whole month for management to work on that. And then we report out that following month. Okay, so anytime you see that, as you can see, if the original date was June of 2025 in one of these sections, you'll see where we say we're reporting out in July or within the next audit committee meeting that we have. Okay. So with that, one of the key things that I also want to note, that even though it's reported, anything that has the word date in it, as you can see, that means there was a request for a date change. Okay. And then if you go to the supporting management action report that supports that, we will have remarks as to why it was changed. Like, for instance, at this point in the audit or donation and grant processes, even though the Division of Data and Accountability doesn't exist anymore, that was the division's name at the time of the completion of their section. So we are remaining that, because if we were trying to wordsmith everything on a continuous basis, that may be cumbersome and confusing if people were to track past documents to this. But what we wanted to highlight in the remarks here is, for example, due to the new positions and defining new roles and responsibilities, that was the need for the change date. So we can make sure, because with this organizational change, we want to make sure, what player's playing what role now, and report it out correctly. And so we're working on that. Any questions? Okay. Now, as before, we used to have a status report. What we've converted now is to this internal audit dashboard, where it shows a relationship to the strategic plan objectives and the status of whether we're completed or in progress or overdue. Yes, we have a lot of that are overdue at this point, but that was due to the hurricane. So we were actually going to have two other audits included with the one we had today. But we needed to push that one for that 1 week we were out for the hurricane, and the second, and we included a second week in that because we still had some on-site visits we needed to make to complete these audits, as well as communications with on-site people, but we felt it was relevant to allow them to rebuild a normalcy back into the school setting after, a week-long hurricane event, and so we are 2 weeks behind on that. But the Booster Club, the inventory audit of transportation parts, as well as the business process reviews are potentially on schedule for the next audit committee meeting. So we will be providing to you and depending on the timing of the other ones, we may include those as well. But we also have to be, even though we say it's overdue based on the end date that we have here, which is based on our audit committee meeting and not necessarily when we said the audit would be due. So we're trying to support also the timing of completing our hour-long meeting so we don't overload with too many audits and we can allow the structured time to have that discussion if anything is needed. Then we also highlighted our non-audit services, internal audit office activities, as well as district supporting activities. So as you know, we don't just all do audits. There's two of us. That would be Cheryl Hoffman and I do outside of just audits. We do consulting, advising. Jack does consulting, advising sometime. We do trainings for the districts for ethics and so forth. So those kind of activities are all placed in here where it says internal office activities. That includes building risk assessments, attending extended cabinet meetings, as those, working with, management in different various, helping with policy maintenance as part of our roles as well. So that would be included in that through that process. Any questions? And so at the end here, this is where it's just showing in yearly time per employee. So you can see, versus audits versus other audits. And I think we're on track here, as you can see most of the time for other services are Cheryl and I, and that's where we should be most of our time in, which is Cheryl's our internal audit assistant, as well as then the audit should be the high of our auditors. Do you have any questions?
No, ma'am. I guess I would just recommend to the committee, it sounds like next month might be a longer one, so coordinate your schedules accordingly. It sounds like Mrs. Underwood and her team have some stuff to tell us. So again, to echo Mr. Moss, Jack, great job this morning. And I look forward to the district taking this on. I'll entertain a motion to adjourn. We are adjourned. Thank you. Hey, man.